I'm sorry about that. I feel badly for you on that one.
And of course you said yes, right?
Romans chapter 2, if you would. Romans chapter 2. We're going to finally finish up a section we've been working on for a number of weeks here, verses 1 through 16. We're going to focus this morning on verses 11 to 16 and finally get that under control. And I'll just correct what Tim said. I don't do this every week. It seems like I miss about half as much as I'm here these days. But the weeks I'm here, I hope we're prepared, and we're going to take a look and finish this section out and deal with Paul's description of the gospel, which is a little wider, a little more involved than we generally give it credit for. I want you to take a look at that, because in the backdrop for this, what Paul begins with, and he begins to describe the gospel, is he begins by describing judgment. And that's what we've been dealing with from about verse 18 on. But we need to understand this idea that the gospel is a broader understanding we generally bring to it. Let me read this for you in chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, just to give you the background once again. Paul says this, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For it is the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous will live by faith." And I want you to take a look and understand that and get a sense for that. Especially that phrase. It says it comes by faith and for faith. And this is something we often stop with and do not explain carefully with the gospel. It begins with this understanding. Man is in need of righteousness. Man is guilty before God. He stands condemned before God. He will face judgment if something doesn't change. And here's this dilemma. What can man do to change that? How can he gain righteousness? What avenues are available to him in and of himself to gain the righteousness required to avoid judgment? No. There's nothing there. Even if you could possibly, from this day forward, be perfectly righteous from here on out, what does that not take care of?
Previous.
Everything that happened before that. But of course, you know you can't do that going forward, so even if you could, you can't erase that path. So what does God do to change that condition?
He provides.
Come on, this is your chance. Where's our getting into tonight? What does God do to change this condition? You're sharing the gospel. What has God done to change the condition of man?
His son on the cross.
He sent his son to die on our behalf that we might be granted righteousness. That we might have the righteousness required before God, that we will not be judged and held before the law of God. That is what God has done. You could not come up with it. God gave you his righteousness. Do you understand that? Jesus Christ has put his righteousness in your life that you might stand no longer condemned before God. And that's where the gospel stops. That's all you need to know. And I'm sad to say that many times when we share the gospel, that is precisely where we stop. But remember what it says here. You were saved by faith for faith. Now what does that mean?
Live by it.
Now you have to live by it. Do you understand that? God made you something new. He instilled a new character in you that you might live out that character. God did not just declare you no longer guilty before the law. He gave you a newness of life with the intention that that life would be lived out. And once you understand, to be lived out, that it would be seen and understood by a watching world that you are different than they are. That was God's intention. Righteousness does not just describe our legal status, it describes the character that now defines us. And man had a different approach to that. Some people believed that, they took that faith, but what did most of the world do when God offered this out? Put himself out there, this is who I am, this is my righteousness, and this is what I'm offering. What was the response of most of humanity?
Kill him, crucify him, spit on him, mock him.
I like this. Verse 18, "For the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." Now that's a key element there. Despite all the talk out there, despite all the things we're hearing this today, this is what people always tell us. You know, what we're trying to do is just be inclusive of everyone. We want you to stop being so judgmental. We want everyone should have honor. Everyone should be accepted. Everyone should be affirmed. Have you noticed that is not the case? I was watching this past week, they have a documentary that's coming up. We've had more than a decade now of the transgenderism in America and in the Western world. And we now have, for the first time, a generation that has grown up from the time that they first were introduced to this and are now adults and are now facing the consequences of that ideology. So we have an adult group that now has to look at their lives and what they dealt with. And there was one young man that was rather intriguing to me, and he was very, very articulate. And he made this comment. He goes, "What you need to understand is what I was involved in was a cult. It was not anything about being all-inclusive. In fact, we were told purposely that when we entered into this, we needed to cut ourselves off from our family, and most especially, we needed to cut ourselves off from anything to do with the Christian faith." Specifically, this was named. Now, why would they want to do that?
Obviously, it calls them out. The truth is
The truth.
opposite to what they're believing.
The truth is the opposite of what they suppress the truth. If you go around the world today, in Australia, for instance, if you were to stop and pray with a transgender person and pray that God would deliver them from that, you can go to jail. Literally. In Great Britain, if you are seen praying within a certain distance of a abortion center, you can be arrested and jailed. Yes.
Including if your home is within that distance.
You can be
cannot
in
pray
your
in
living
home.
room on your knees at your own house, and if you're within that frame, they can arrest you.
Wow.
It's an incredible thing. Just in our top hat up there in Canada, the same kind of things. It is illegal to teach someone that they can escape from homosexuality or transgenderism through faith. It's illegal to teach that. Suppressing the truth is what the world does. That's what they're after.
And suppressing means you know it.
Yes.
You know it, and you're still trying to do it. It's not
That
that you
is
don't
the
know.
level of man's rebellion. They are not about inclusion. They are not about letting everybody be. They are purposing to suppress the truth. That is what they are after. They want to celebrate that. Verse 31, they not only suppress the truth, but they celebrate those that reject the truth. They make heroes out of the people that reject that. So that this is what God has done. It sums up when we come to chapter 2. It says, therefore, they have no excuse. He's saying they know they're guilty. The truth is right in front of them. Man knows because God has revealed it, and man knows that God is right, and now he judges this. And we found there were two groups that basically had this approach to rebelling against God. Group number 1 in chapter 1 said, we looked at God, we looked at the morality of God, we looked at the truth of God, and we said we'll make our own gods, our own morality, our own truth. They went full-blown rejection. They went into full rebellion. They were open about it. They don't hide it. They revel in it. The second group is in chapter 2. Now, what did that group do?
I like what God has to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, where they judge wickedness, yet do the same thing. They're self-righteous.
Yeah. You know what? We think God is a great guy, and we think his morality is a great thing, and we love using his morality to judge everybody else. I think God's morality is great when I get to judge you. That's marvelous to have God's ability to do that. And I can look at you and go, that was wrong, and God said so, and I can point it out to you. What was the one thing you didn't do with God's truth, though, in this group? Quiet yourself. It's really good for everybody else, but I'm finding it's a little restrictive when it comes to me. And so they had a different approach. They put on a show, if you would. It's hypocrisy. We use that word hypocrisy. If you remember that word, literally it means two-faced. And it comes from the ancient world. Have you ever been to a play and you've seen those two masks up there, the happy face and the sad face
Sure.
that they put up over the
Sure.
comedy and tragedy? Why do they have those masks up there? Because in the ancient world, and for the longest time, actors and actresses, mostly actors, because it was considered scandalous for many years for a woman to be on stage, but the actor would come up and they didn't just do a role, they wore a mask for each role. And so you had multiple faces. You could be a whole bunch of different things, and you had different faces. And hypocrisy became the word that used to describe someone who had a different face for different situations. They put on a play, they put on an act to pretend they were something they were not. And hypocrisy becomes the issue. God is saying that I'm not going to put up with either one of these. And now we are in this, as Paul is starting this whole thing about the gospel and saying God is going to judge this kind of sin, both the outright rebellion and the hypocrite as well. Neither one is going to, matter of fact, as we found, which group does God consider more guilty?
The second one.
The second one. But the one is in open rebellion. The other one is at least trying to do certain moral things on the outside. Why are they more guilty?
Better to be cold than lukewarm.
Greater knowledge of the truth.
Greater knowledge of the truth. You have accepted that this is true from God, and you still won't believe it. Yes?
My mentor and I are reading through a book right now, and it's talking about the lies of the world. And one thing that was really interesting is the author, she mentioned, she said, you know, people will tell themselves, so you'll tell yourself the truth. If you're believing a lie, you'll try to tell yourself it over and over again to believe that it's true. But if you actually believe in the truth, then you don't have to do that. You know, and so you're seeing that within society today. Is they keep telling us over and over, this is true, this is true, this is true, because they want us to believe that it's true, and it's really not. You know, and I thought that was really interesting, that like mindset.
It goes back, there was a famous writer that put out this whole idea of how this was called the big lie theory. And that was this: if you tell a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, it becomes truth to most people. And that is the nature of it. Even if you know it's not true, you can convince most people it is if you say it long enough, loud enough, and often enough.
That was Goebbels' whole thing. With Hitler.
That was the whole thing, that how that goes. But God here is saying, I am not going to play the hypocritical game. I have an absolute standard. And Paul is pointing out that God judges by what is right, what is just. And we're looking at the standards for judgment. We're seeing that God has a right to judge, and that God judges by a very consistent way. Our own culture goes back into Scripture, and when we founded our legal system, one of the things they tried to do was look into Scripture and let that be the foundation for how justice worked. And we came up with a statue, Lady of Justice. You remember what she looks like?
Yeah.
Blindfold.
Interesting. Two things. Yes, one, she's holding the scale, right? Has the scale out in front of her. The scale is supposed to weigh justice. We look at the evidence, we look at the things back, and we balance out, and we justly go based on the evidence, not anything else. That's supposed to be one thing. But here's the other thing the scale is for. If guilt has been established, now you weigh out what justice should be dispensed based on the level of guilt. You ever heard this phrase from Scripture? An eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, brand for brand, wound for wound. You know how most people interpret that?
Personal vengeance.
Personal vengeance. You know what it's talking about?
Court.
Punishment fit the crime.
The court. Let the punishment fit the crime. It was designed to limit justice to only do what was right and fair based upon what was done wrong. It was to keep things from being excessive. It was also designed to keep things from being too soft. In other words, you had to balance out and deliver justice based on what was done wrong, not for any other reason. But the second one, notice, she's blindfolded. Why blindfolded? How does that ensure impartiality? What are they after there?
You can't see and then be biased based on what you see.
Okay.
It's judging the actual facts or.
It's supposed to go after the facts, but it was a deeper one than that. Yes?
Judge the rich the same as the poor.
You shouldn't look at a person's face or a person's background, their popularity, how famous they are, how powerful they are, how weak they are. None of those things. You should not look to discover, oh, this is a person I don't want to judge. I had some friends years ago that were firefighters, and I lost them because I always made fun of the fact they got paid to sleep. But anyway, no, still friends. But they mentioned that they got these stickers when they became that they put on their personal cars. And they noticed that if you had the sticker and you got pulled over by a police officer, the odds were very good you would not get a ticket. Because they go, well, firefighter, it's a courtesy. God doesn't give anybody a sticker. Okay? Nobody's going to get out of justice based upon an appearance. So it was blindfolded. The Greeks had an interesting one. Their statue was blindfolded, but it wasn't holding a scale. It had no hands. Now think about that. Why did justice have a blindfold and no hands.
She could have took his bill.
So you couldn't take a bribe.
Oh,
The idea being you couldn't pay justice off. And that was their idea of looking at justice. Justice is a demand of God. Leviticus 19:15, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. Deuteronomy 16:19 through 20, you shall not pervert justice, you shall not show partiality, you shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. This was supposed to be the basis of our legal system. We looked at this and said that's the ideal because God shows no partiality. And if you come back to our passage here, in verse 11, notice how it starts here. Now I know in most of yours, verse 11 is stuck up there right after verse 10. It belongs at the beginning of verse 12. It really belongs to the next group. For God shows no partiality. Does anybody have a different translation than that? No favoritism with God. If you go to the King James, you may have heard this phrase, for there is no respect of persons with God. There is no respect of persons with God. No one impresses or intimidates God. There is no one who looks in the face of God and goes, oh, well, I really can't treat them. I can't judge them. No one has that capacity. The Greek has that same phrase. So Peter uses it, and you find it about 10 other places. But that no respect of persons, it's an interesting one. And again, it's the literal translation is to not receive the face of someone. And that goes back to that blind justice. Again, you don't look at who it is and then decide whether you're going to have a different standard of justice or not. The face of someone. Shouldn't be an attractive person. Oh, she's really cute. I'm going to be nice to her in court. It shouldn't be someone, oh, that person's really powerful. They have friends in high places. I can't deal with them. The face shouldn't matter. Nor the sad, I've had a tough childhood and things have been really rough on me and you should give me a different standard of justice. Again, those shouldn't matter. God has a different standard for this. Man is judged on things. Now, we found out then in our passages so far in verses 1 to 16, God has a series of things he uses for justice. We found out first off, man is judged on what he knows. He is judged by knowledge. How much of the truth does he understand? And as we said from the very beginning, there's always that claim, this person's never heard the gospel, they've never read a word of scripture, but God said from the very beginning, you have a foundation of knowledge based upon what? Creation. What does creation tell you? It tells you there's a creator, there's a starting point. What else is creation? It's order, it's structure, it's power. What does that tell you about it?
Intelligence.
There's an intelligence, and intelligence suggests there's also going to be a moral code, the standards. The universe is governed by certain laws. This creator is intelligent, is great, and he has laws and standards that need to be obeyed. And we found that that was the foundation for this. It came down to the second chapter, the same idea that man is judged by what he knows. He can refuse to honestly accept that. He can say whatever he wants, but he knows enough to be judged. Therefore, there is guilt, and the guilt is based upon what is true. They can tend to embrace it, or they can deny it and rewrite it, but they know that there are certain things that are right and true, and man practices these things in his own culture. He proves he understands this. And then we also found out that this adds to man's guilt because he knows of the Creator God, he knows the greatness of God. There are two things that happen. Remember the first thing we saw? God decided to do something. Man said, I'm going to reject God, I'm going to do what I want. And God said, you want to sin? Okay, but what's going to happen?
Yeah, the penalties of those sins.
You're going to have to live with the consequences of some of this. He is gracious enough not to live with all the consequences or we destroy ourselves, but he compels us to face the fact that sin has consequences. On the flip side of that, in verses 4 and 5, we found this, but God is also gracious in that while on the one hand, he gives us a little taste of judgment so that we have enough sense to back away and accept his grace, But he also shows his kindness and goodness in creation. He is good in that all the good things flow from God. Everything you enjoy in this life, everything you have in terms of relationships, all that you have in the bounty of this world, God shows his graciousness. So God, on the one hand, gives you a little taste of judgment to nudge you in the right direction, and he gives you a graciousness to know his favor and kindness. And man's response to God's graciousness and kindness, that God teaches him in a gentle manner how he should change, man's response is to mock God and to make fun of the fact that God, I told you two things. If God doesn't do anything about sin, we complain. Why doesn't God judge the world? Why doesn't God stop these people from why does God allow evil in the world? And we already found that out, because if God erased all evil in the world, where would that leave you? But the second one is not only does God not judge you, but the second one, people look and say, why does God, when God finally does do something about sin, when there is judgment, what's our next response in this world? How could a loving God do such a thing? I am shocked by God's... Yeah. We just lay it on. So God can't win. Man doesn't want God to be right, so no matter what God does, he's always wrong in man's eyes. They mock God and increase their guilt. Now, the last time we looked at this one, and this one was a controversial one, but we found that God judges by works. God judges by works. Does God save by works? No, but God judges by works. And you can argue all you want, but it's right there in Scripture. Here's John 5:28. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those that have done good to the resurrection of life, and those that have done evil, the resurrection of judgment. That's what Scripture says. Man is going to be judged by his works. But how can we have salvation by grace and judged by works? That comes from an important one. We said we always stop one verse too soon in Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Because Ephesians 2:8 and 9 has that great passage. For by grace you are saved. This is not of yourselves, right? Not by works, lest any man should boast. But what does verse 10 say?
Gift of God.
What's that?
It's a gift of God.
Gift of God. What is it 10?
We are his handiwork, created in Christ Jesus.
To do good works. Now we come back to that. Remember we started? We are saved by faith for faith, a life based in faith. So we have this aspect that says, no, you're not saved by works, but you are saved unto works, which means any real believer who's going to live more than a minute after their salvation is going to start to live differently. They're going to have works. And here's the key element. What God is saying, what Paul is pointing out from God's perspective is this. God looks out and he can tell his own from the unsaved. How can he tell? Because the ones he has redeemed, the ones he has remade, are different than the others. How does he know that? Because unlike you, if you're like me who thinks they can understand the intent of the heart and what's going on inside a person's head, we can't, but God can. So God can tell a fake work from a real one, and he can know the character of the people he's looking at. He can see his own, and he can see the false ones out there. God sees that. Here's the reality. Man without God cannot do anything that pleases God completely. That's a hard one. Does that mean the redeemed, the unredeemed never do good things?
No.
Certainly. What kind of things can the unredeemed people do that are good? Can they be generous at times? And how is that different from the generosity of a believer?
Doing it for themselves.
What's that?
Doing it for themselves.
Often is the intent, what goes on. I've always a little thing, I saw at the college a number of times, people gave huge donations, and in every case they gave a donation, you know what they also got on campus? A building named after themselves. We have the Soraya, which is a play center out there. We have all shows. It was the Soraya, named for the person that paid a big check. We always have to have this. Building after building in the college I worked at is named after a person. There's always some impurity to it if it is not a believer. Can a believer do things with impurity? Oh, yeah.
Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira certainly had a problem with that.
Martial arts?
Yes. But we have to understand this, that God says that his people will work differently. All through the book of James, James 1:22, be doers of the word and not hearers only, because if you do, you deceive, and I like this, yourself. You notice that? The first person you lie to is you. That's the reality of life. James 2:14-17. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but doesn't have works? Can that faith save him? And you say, well, of course it can. Well, here's his point. If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, and give them nothing for the need of the body, what good is that? So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. If it hasn't changed your character, it's missing. This is James 2:26. For if the body apart from the spirit is dead, also faith apart from works is dead. And of course, James is the only one that ever says anything like that. So if we take James out, we're better off, right? Somebody want to read verse 14 in our passage right here? Romans 2:14.
For when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law, are a law to themselves.
Okay, there's one that's, I should have done 13 on my mistake. For it is not the hearers of the law, I should have told you the right one, who are righteous before God, but what?
Doers.
The doers of the law who are justified. Does that mean doing the law makes them justified?
No.
Or does being justified make them do the law? That's the one. And now I've recorded making it the wrong verse, but thanks for reading that so well. And it'll be an important verse when we get there. So it's not for complete waste that we do that. That is the reality we see then. Works are a judgment basis because God can see his own. And we saw time and time again that Jesus would say, how will they know your testimony is worth listening to? How can they tell that the gospel you carry has power? Because your life has been changed. Changed in what way? By observable difference in how you live. If you have a testimony and no capacity to show that God, how good a testimony can you give there? Walter, here we are, you have handed out those things. The high school student now wants to sit and talk to you. If you have to give him that Gideon Bible, and you do what?
Tell them to read the last 2 pages.
Yeah. But you come down to this, and if there's nothing you can say, well, what's your change? Well, nothing. I'm saved now. What are you living? Oh, no. Matter of fact, I'll be leaving here. I'm meeting a woman other than my wife over at a bar here in about 15 minutes. But there has to be a difference, doesn't there?
Well, the world expects it. You know, that's the first thing they pick on. I mean, your actions have to match your words, because
Theirs don't, but ours do. And I'll tell you, we get upset by that, but they're right. They're right. We are the only ones that have been empowered by God to live differently. We can't call them hypocrites because that's their character. But they're right. They hold us to a different standard because God holds us to a different standard.
and if we're not, we're lying to ourselves, like you said earlier. So.
That's what it comes down to.
Let your light shine before men, they might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.
And that light is important because we're living in a dark world. And has anybody ever turned on a little tiny light in a completely dark room and noticed how big a difference that makes? There's no missing that, is there? And that's what he wants us to be. Now,
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking.
Paul is going to sum all of this up here in verses 11 to 16. He's now going to say, God, you can be complained about God and his judgment. God is completely fair and impartial in everything, and he's going to prove his point. I want to read this for you, verses 11 to 16, just to finish this out. For God shows no partiality. For all who have sinned without the law will perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. He says you have a conscience that tells you if you're doing right and wrong. And he's talking about unbelievers. Verse 16, and on that day, when according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. God has an impartial judgment. Matter of fact, I want to put this out to you. John brought this up last week, and we'll put it out here this week. Why are we told that everybody is going to be judged? Because there are two distinct judgments. I'm not going to go into this in depth. I'm going to put this out to you. There are two judgment thrones. One is called the Bema Seat judgment. You know what a Bema Seat was in the ancient days? It was the place after the Olympic Games where the people came to receive their rewards for competition. The Bema Seat is where believers go to be rewarded for their service. I'm going to put something out. Matthew brought this up last week. We said they'd have that place where there's, you burn this out, the wood, hay, and stubble is burned away, but there'll be some gold, some silver, and some gems. You find out which works were done in the way they should, and it's going to be found out. And here's the bad news. Some of you are going to have smaller piles of gold, silver, and gems than others. But here's the reality. No unbeliever will have their works burned and have anything left. But a believer will be rewarded based on that Bema Seat judgment for their service to Christ. Their works will be judged. Which means some of you are going to get a much posher place in heaven. You'll get to stay at the Hilton rooms. The rest of us will have to be downstairs in the Motel 6. Is that what it says?
We'll leave the light on for you.
Yeah, you'll leave the light on for us. Thank you for that. We appreciate that. The reality hour comes out in a different thing, because if you notice there, if you get back into Revelations, there's an interesting moment in which everyone who gets their crowns of glory at the Bema Seat, you know who they give them to? Jesus Christ. They go, I couldn't have done a thing without you. And Christ goes, you're right. You're absolutely right. But there is a great white throne judgment. And the great white throne judgment, there are those who are going to be judged under the law. And I want you to understand, again, they are going to be rewarded according to their works in terms of judgment. And some will get. There are different levels of hell. There are darker places in there than there are others. Some people deserve worse punishment, and God says they will get worse punishment. That is a reality of things, and those two things will happen. Now, verse 12 deals with something here. He's going to go back to this whole idea of the two groups, those that have the law and who's the ones that don't. Now let's start with the second group, those that have the law. What group do you think Paul is referring to at the time he writes this? The ones that have the law and know the law in and out? Jews, his own people. Paul was one of them. We know the law. You notice what it says there. Those who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. And he says it's going to be worse for you. And again, why is it worse? Because they know what's wrong. They see a problem there. There's clearly an issue that they were aware of and did wrong anyway. So group 2 there is going to have a problem. But now, since we know that you're going to be judged by the law, what about the ones that don't have the law? Obviously, they're going to do fine, right? What does it say about those in the first part of that verse? For those who have sinned without the law will also, now that seems like a bad word. See the next word there? Perish. They will perish without the law. Well, based on what?
The law in their hearts.
There's going to be a problem here. That word perish means destroy or to put to death, and a lot of people have looked at this and decided that this is where you have the idea of soul sleep. There really is no hell. They will say this: God sends some to heaven, and those who have sinned perish. God erases them. They just cease to exist, so no one really goes to hell. That's just not in there. Except you keep finding these verses about weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, which doesn't sound like someone who doesn't exist. There's that whole, what's that?
Jesus talks about hell more than he does.
Than anyone else in Scripture. He talks about hell, and it's always a place. And there's this story that you might have noticed of the guy that's in hell, and he goes, would you give me just a touch of water on my tongue, and can you send someone from the dead to my family so that they won't end up here? That doesn't sound like someone who doesn't exist anymore. And if you go into the Revelation period, when it goes, they're cast into hell, and it says alive. It makes that very plain. So that doesn't work. But we still have this word that says perish. I wonder what else it could mean. But the other word that it can be is ruined. When something is ruined. You ever had something you really liked that just is no longer will function the way it's done. It's ruined. You have that perfect stemware, it's the glass crystal and then there's a crack. That's no longer useful. That's ruined. Your favorite shirt, your kids does something, you come home and you lift the baby and go, oh, there. So much for that one. Those things happen. Bad things happen.
The plan can be ruined too.
The plan can be ruined too, but I'm going to come to this. How is a person ruined? What was man created to do?
Glorify God.
To glorify God and have perfect fellowship with Him. If you refuse the grace of God to be made righteous, you know what you are? Ruined from that purpose. And that is what he's talking about here. People who refuse the grace of God have been ruined to their purpose and therefore cannot enter into glory. It just doesn't work there. To ruin something unfit for its major purpose. That same word, you may have heard this, wineskins and new wine. You would take brand new wineskins when you put brand new wine in. Why?
Because it's malleable. It'll move.
Because wine, as it ferments, will swell, and leather in its early stage has some elasticity. However, once you've done that, you can no longer use that wineskin for that purpose, because you put new wine in it again, what'll happen? It'll burst. It has no elasticity. So that word for ruined is what that same word here. Something can be ruined of its purposes. So perishing does not mean going out of existence. These people are going to be, the wages of sin is still death, and this is what they're going to deal with. Now, but there's a greater judgment for those under the law. Now, I want to understand something. The law was never meant to avoid judgment, and this is where the Jews and where Paul, for most of his life, had made this mistake of thinking the law was the means of pleasing God. Galatians 3:24. So then the law was our guardian until Christ came in order that we might be justified by faith. Now think about that. The law was our guardian until Christ came along that we might be justified by faith. How was the law a guardian?
Sometimes I should say tutor.
Showed the standard and showed to
Yeah.
His tutor.
Yeah,
It was a mirror to tell us what we were.
there you go. A guardian. It showed you had sin. Why is that a guardian?
Keep you from
Didn't
doing
know
worse
what to
stuff.
change.
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, you think you're okay. It's an interesting thing. Leprosy. For years, they thought leprosy by itself caused all the degeneration of the skin to come off, and you see this almost skeletal thing. But what it does, it deadens sensation. And what people literally do is they rub their own skin off because they can't tell they're doing it. Without the sensitivity to know you're causing problems. One of the most dangerous things in the world, there are people who have a condition where they cannot feel pain. I mean, they can just lean on a stove and not know. The law was there as a guardian, a tutor, to show you your sin until what happened? Until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. Here's the understanding. I've looked at the law, and I've looked at myself in regards to the law, and I go, that's bad. Jesus comes along and says, here's the solution. And the smart guy who's been taught by the law goes, I need that. I want that right now. That's a great idea. Let's use that. But people didn't do that well. And this is an interesting one. This is from Matthew. This is Matthew 11, verses 20 to 24. And Jesus is talking to the people here. And he says, he began to denounce the critics where most of his mighty works have been done because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! And the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And for you, Capernaum, will you be exalted into heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For in the mighty works done and you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. Now, how can you be saying, you've read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, how demented can you be? They're struck blind and they're still pawing around trying to find those men to attack them sexually. That's a messed up place. And he's saying, Capernaum, you're worse than that. How are they worse than that?
You know the right thing to do and you don't do it.
You are people who know the law. And the fulfillment of the law has walked right in front of you. It has done miraculous things in your presence. It has taught you the truth. Who was that person that did that? Jesus Christ. These cities, every last one of them, are where he did incredible things. Some of his greatest works were done in these places. And he's saying, if you watched that and won't believe, that makes you more guilty than Sodom. That is the level of judgment. God is fair. He is very fair. The hottest part of hell is reserved for those who know the most. Absolutely will be. Now, he understands the challenge that's going to come from this. The Jew is going to look and go, well, that's not fair. I tried to serve. I mean, do you recognize how much trouble we went through to preserve your word? Have you ever studied how the Jews kept copying and keeping the Bible absolutely pure? Man, what they went through, they counted the letters. And they would copy apart and they would know the exact number of letters and they'd go back and count did I get every last letter, every last little mark? They were particular. That's why they talk about the jot and tittle. Every little mark was preserved. They preserved the law. They loved the law. And yet he's saying that's going to count for nothing. How can that be fair? We labored for centuries. We've labored for this. Telling people we're God's people, keeping God's word. How can that not be good? Verse 13 puts that to you. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before, but the doers. And here we come down. That word for hearers is an interesting term. It's an unusual word. The most common word was akuo, which just meant to hear. But this word here is akrotetes. Akraotes. Akraotes is professional listener. I want to put this out to you. I'll give you an example. When I was working at the college, my wife and I, one of the things that came down was an edict that said we needed to clean out some of the dead wood. And here we had a problem. There were some people who came and wouldn't go away. You know, I'm here for a 4-year degree. How long have you been doing that? 10 years. And here's the thing, they kept changing their major. Some of them would just keep, and they were always listening. They came and listened and listened and listened and listened, but they would never go away and do anything with it. And so there finally came this thing, you have just so many years to finish a degree, and then you need to go. Because we didn't have enough room for new students coming in because we couldn't get rid of the old ones. That's what he's talking about here. This is a person who spends all their time listening. They are a professional listener. They just want to keep learning, but they don't want to face life. They don't want to apply it anywhere. They have no intention of taking it anywhere. I have met theologians like this. And I tell you, God wasn't their God. Their theology was their God. They have spent they'll come in, you'll come in, here's their house, they'll go, here, this is my library, here's my study section on this, and they'll tell you all the different people they have, all the books they have, all the information they found. Oh, we studied this, and here, let me talk to you about Arianism, and I can give you the whole history of that. Let me talk to you about Superlapsarianism, I can give you the whole history on that. And here's this great person in the church and that. They know everything except God. They have spent their lives as students. They have spent their lives with theology and never spent a moment with God. You need to be doers to be on the right side of judgment. Knowing a lot doesn't get you in the right place. There are people that study the law for the sake of knowing the law and never for the sake of knowing God. They know everything about the law except what it's supposed to be telling them about the God they're supposed to worship. There's a problem in there. There's a huge problem in the law. But the law, the benefit of the law, you're still guilty. James 2:10, to transgress one part of the law is to be guilty of the whole law. Guilt is guilt. The law is perfect, man is not. And it's meant to drive us to the desperation of seeking grace. So he looks at this group and he goes, no, not impressed by how much you know. I wish you knew perhaps less and were a little more about doing, and that might make a difference. But now the Gentiles can come into this. Jew is going, it's unfair. The Gentile says, you know what's unfair? You just said these guys are being judged because they know. I don't know anything. I never heard of Jesus Christ. I never saw one Bible. I never read one verse. I didn't get to see any of the miracles. I don't know any of this stuff. And as a matter of fact, Paul, I'll quote your own stuff to you. Romans 4:15, for the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. It says here right in the text, Romans 5:13, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Your own words, Paul. I cannot be held, and there are whole swaths of the Christian church that will say this, that those that will never heard cannot be judged. Can't be judged. Catholic Church has a place to take care of that. If you've never heard of it, you go to purgatory, and there you can get another chance to hear the gospel. And we'll give you one more shot. You know, this is, sort of like your 90 courses in college. You need to redo high school. We're going to bring you in. You can't take college courses yet, but we'll let you retake this thing until you learn the stuff that you're supposed to know before you got here.
And we'll charge you for that.
And we'll still charge you for that. And we don't mind taking your money.
Math 50.
But how does he answer that one? It's not the hearers of the law who are righteous, but for the doers, they'll be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves. What's he saying? By what you do in life, you show you understand the law. You understand there's a moral code in the universe. Have you ever noticed that every culture on earth has a certain number of things in common, no matter where you go? There are things we all agree on should and should not be done. What are some of those?
Murder.
We probably shouldn't murder, unless of course we do it outside our tribe, in which case they're not covered. But you and I in this tribe, we don't murder each other. They may limit it, but they understand it. What else? Stealing. We don't like people stealing our stuff. And again, unless it's from the other tribe.
I was gonna say, it's really curious there with murder, stealing, rape, all that kind of things. It's wrong, but then I have every culture has a complicated legal way of, okay, now it's justified. Now it's not murder, it's killing because he did this to me or whatever. Like, one of my favorites is the mafia. The mafia, they go around murdering all the time. No, they don't. They have this whole system of, okay, you can't kill him until he does this thing. Now you can order a hit on him.
Yep.
So to them, it's
Qualified.
I know murder is wrong, and so we cannot murder. So I'm gonna
But I want to
kill.
murder, so I got to find
So
some
I
way to
gotta
make it right under very select
justify-
circumstances.
I have to justify my sin, proving I have a conscience.
As a justified
That's how we do it.
qualification. Yeah.
That's how we figure it out. And again, that makes you more guilty because you understood the beginning point, this is wrong. And now I had to come up with this twisted way to find a way to get away with it. And it makes you more guilty.
We're horrified when a pregnant woman is murdered
Yes.
or in a car accident or something. But if she had chosen to take care of that child before it was born, it's to kill.
Yeah.
But if it's, someone murders a pregnant woman, we're like, oh yeah, that's a murder.
We make it a double homicide. This is the
And it should
twisted
be.
logic we have.
But then we, yeah.
It's a
But if
double
that mother
homicide if she was
decides to
going to
kill
have the
her
baby.
child, Yeah.
Yeah. But if she kills herself, that's her body, and they're going,
Well, we rename it then. It's a
Yeah.
fetus, not a clump of cells, not a.
and that is entirely, and there's again, a twisted way we
But
do
we know
this.
murder is wrong.
We know these things are. But all through, we like people that pay their debts. We don't like people that welch on a debt. We all have these certain things. There are moral principles. We like people to do certain things. There are non-Christian cultures that have a high level of honor for marriage. Far less divorce than we have in this country. They're really particular. You mean that. If you gave that pledge, I don't care what happens, you keep it. They have high levels of this, a sense of integrity about things. You go to some cultures and you'll find less crime of the things that we find so common. The Greek Stoics spoke about a law that operated in the universe that basically said if man broke it, he did to his own peril. There were things operating that we all knew were true. In the Eastern religions, karma. You ever run into karma? Bad karma, what does that refer to? There are things you just shouldn't do or it's going to come back around to you. There's an understanding out there that there is a law and a standard that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be followed. So what did he say? For the Gentiles do not have the law by nature, do what the law requires. And you can look at it anywhere. I remember in studying cultural anthropology, they talked about how it was always that the major culture, their ideas filtered down to the lesser cultures. And they said that's why we know that the Bible is not as old as it claims to be, because this is this podunk little Jewish community that was never a massive empire, and yet their values you find in all these other Western cultures. And so obviously they lied about it because they had to get their ideas from someone else, because never will a small culture infect the larger culture. That was their argument. Do you have any evidence that it was written later? No, none whatsoever. But just because we came up with this theory, we can throw out the Bible and say it had to be much later than what everybody says. But what we find is, when you're honest about it, the standards that God wrote down did precede these others, but other people accepted it. Because guess what? God created all of humanity, and built into him is a conscience and an ingrained knowledge that certain things are true. Now, we always limit it. It's true when you steal from me. It's true when you're going to try to kill me. It's true when you cheat on me. Not so true when I want to do those things to you. But we know it's true. Yes?
Well, even with a little toddler, they know when they've done something wrong and they try to hide it or lie about it or cover it up or blame it on a sibling.
Isn't it funny you never had to teach a child to do that?
Never had to teach them.
Never had to teach a child to lie.
Never had to teach them that it was wrong to hit or do something. They know that.
They know it.
They know it.
Even dogs know when they've done something wrong.
I had a Rottweiler that wanted to get in the trash. And you got me off a rabbit trail, I'm sorry. The trash was on this side of the house where there was no light. And there was the back sliding glass door, and then his area over here. The dog would come up and you'd hear the rattling. He'd pull a bag out of the trash. He'd come and he'd drop it off right about here just so it couldn't be seen through the door. He'd come in and look through the sliding glass. And if he didn't see us, he'd then take the trash out in the yard and just tear it and smear it all over us. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. But in his mind, if I didn't see him, it wasn't a crime. It was only bad if I saw him do it. And I will tell you, that is one of the most human traits in the world. It is not wrong as long as you don't see me do it. Then it is. As long as I don't get caught, it's not a problem.
Yeah, we're like that. I mean, we sin in the dark, right? We go in secret. You know.
Verse 15, they show that the work of the law is written in their hearts, with their conscience also bearing witness, with their conflicting thoughts, accuse, even excuse them. And there's those conflicting thoughts. People, I've told you before, I love that guy that was running the asylum that said I could release 2/3 of my patients tomorrow if I could convince them they were forgiven. There is that sense of conflicting thought. There is a guilt that is there because man knows he's guilty. Verse 16, and on that day, when according to my gospel, you know, Paul, you wrote your own gospel? What does he mean by that? He's taking ownership. This is mine now. I belong to this. There's a sense that I have now incorporated that into who I am. It is my gospel now. This runs my life. This defines me. He's not saying I wrote it. He's saying this is what I am. My gospel. God judges the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. Well, we'll pop the button there. Close this.